Hello, everyone, and welcome back to SALT Talks. My name is John Darcy. I'm the managing director of SALT, which is a global thought leadership forum and networking platform at the intersection of finance, technology, and public policy. SALT Talks are a digital interview series with leading investors, creators, and thinkers. And our goal on these SALT Talks is the same as our goal at our SALT conferences, which we're excited to resume in the post-pandemic period, God willing, September of 2021 in New York, which we're very excited about. Anybody watching, we'd love to have you there. But our goal on these talks and at those conferences is to provide a window into the mind of subject matter experts, as well as provide a platform for what we think are big ideas that are shaping the future. And there's no bigger idea, we think, shaping the future than the idea of longevity and just the amazing advances that we've seen in life sciences over the last several years. So we're excited, very excited today to welcome Jim Mellon to SALT Talks. Jim is a British entrepreneur and investor with a wide range of interests. Through his private investment company, Burnbrae Group, he has substantial real estate holdings in Germany and the Isle of Man, as well as holdings in private and public companies. Jim's investment philosophy is underpinned by his ability to recognize emerging trends that give rise to new industries or major shifts in markets. This includes the global financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, as foreseen in his first book that he co-authored. It's called Wake Up. And subsequently, in the new science and technologies detailed in Cracking the Code, the great book by Walter Isaacson, and Fast Forward. More recently, Jim has established himself as a leader in the nascent field of aging research and longevity. His groundwork into the field is summarized in the book Juvenescence, which he also co-authored. Jim sits on the board of trustees of the Buck Institute for Research and Aging and the American Federation for Aging Research. He's also a trustee of Biogerontology Research Foundation and the Lifeboat Foundation as an honorary fellow at Oriel College at the University of Oxford and sits on the advisory board of the Milken Institute's Center for the Future of Aging. We're great friends with the team over there at Milken, but I understand that AJ spent some time at Cambridge. I know you're an Oxford guy, Jim. Don't want to create any early tension here in the SALT Talk, but if you guys start butting heads, I'll jump in and be the peacemaker. But hosting today's talk, returning to SALT Talks, is AJ Scaramucci, who is the founder and managing director of the SALT Fund, which is an early stage venture fund that we launched, building on the SALT ecosystem and making investments primarily in the life sciences, biotechnology area. AJ can talk a little bit more about that. But without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to AJ for the interview.
Jim, welcome. So lovely to see you. I'd love to start this interview turning back the clock way back to the Oxford days, actually, where you were studying politics, philosophy, economics. Take me into the mind of Jim at that time. What were you thinking? What were your aspirations? How were you imagining your career unfolding? Let's start there.
Well, thanks, AJ, and thanks, John. It's really great to be on this program. Honestly, probably like you, I went to university very young. I was 17 and I graduated when I was 20. And the only thought I have was passing the exams, which were more difficult than I expected, and also getting a job. And I had a wonderful time at Oxford. I had close links with Oxford, as I'm sure, and I know you have with Cambridge. And I'm deeply grateful for all the connections and all the opportunities that it afforded me. But the most important thing really was to get a job. And so at the end of my time at Oxford, they had something, I'm sure you had the same, it's called a milk round, when the employers come round and they interview people. And it's the usual lot of investment banks and odd array of companies. And I was offered 3 or 4 jobs. One was with a company called Clark Shoes. I think they even sell their shoes in the US. But they've been through several bankruptcies. I'm very glad I didn't go there. Another one was with a well-known investment banking company, and I'm glad I didn't go there either. And the last one was with, the one that I was considering most seriously was with a company that offered me a job in Hong Kong, and it was in fund management. And I didn't know what fund management was. I didn't know what a bond was, even though I had studied economics, and I didn't know what a stock really was. And so, but I took that job because it was in Hong Kong and I wanted to leave the country, which I think is a great thing for anyone. I think if you're living in the US or the UK or anywhere, if you can go and travel the world, what a great opportunity. So I went to Hong Kong. This is a long, long time ago, way before your time. I was paid £5,000 a year And then the company was really growing quickly. It was called GT Management. It's now known as LGT, or Liechtenstein Global Trust, a very big fund management company. And they sent me to San Francisco, where they were opening an office. And so I was able to be at the beginning of the big tech boom in the mid 1980s in the United States. And I can tell you this now, that I think I'm the only person ever to have sat in a commercial aircraft going from Palm Springs to San Francisco, and in front of me was Steve Jobs and Bill Gates together, talking in a friendly fashion on the flight the whole way. And, you know, we all think of them as being great rivals and, you know, never speaking to each other, but they were there. They were in front of me. And if I'd had the guts that I have now, I would have gone and talked to them, and my life might have been completely different.
Wow. That's an amazing story. So, and Jim, as you've kind of entered into your investment career and have cultured your craft, we're curious to know, how have you developed that investment philosophy? What are some of the heuristics you use in making decisions? And then also, what are some times in your career where you've kind of been challenged, or you've seen, you know, there was an up or down that you had to manage or deal with?
Yeah, you know, you're the first person ever that I've spoken to who's used the word heuristics, which is exactly the right word. So my condensed motto, and will be the subject of my next book, is curiosity, adaptability, and application. Curiosity is where you need heuristics. You know, people like us read a lot, regard that as being the job that we have, to try and pick up the little sense that we need to understand where the next opportunity is, rather than, you know, invest in the status quo. Employ heuristics, and those heuristics are honed and developed over time and experience. I don't think you're born with them. I think it's just a question of really working at it. And so most of my morning is taken up with reading, and reading widely on any subject at all. And then, you know, adaptability is particularly important now, where the world is changing so quickly in a technological sense. Young people are going to have to do multiple careers. We all know that. So they have to be adaptable. You know, in my time, you probably went into a job and that was it. And I know lots of people who've done it, of my generation, who've done that, and some successfully, some unhappily. And then the last thing is application. And we all know that unless you're one of the two geniuses sitting in front of me on the Palm Springs flight, or, you know, Zuckerberg, or, you know, one of these very, very few people, Jack Ma, that you have to work hard at it. You know, success is something that doesn't fall in your lap. And so curiosity, adaptability, application have been my watchwords really throughout my career. And I've kind of navigated. And you asked me about, you know, difficult times. Wow, there have been plenty of difficult times. I mean, I'll give you an example. We were on the subject of curiosity, I was reading, and because then the internet wasn't around, in 1994, I was reading about Russia privatizing its industries, and doing it by way of distribution of vouchers to every adult in the federation, and those vouchers were for sale, and foreigners could buy those vouchers. And so myself and my colleague Jane Sutcliffe got on a plane. It was a rather complicated way of getting there, but we eventually ended up in Moscow. We ended up with $2 million in cash, bodyguards, all that sort of stuff. And we bought $2 million worth of vouchers at the vegetable market in Moscow to convert into shares at the auction that was taking place of every single business, ranging from the hairdresser to the oil and gas companies in Russia. And it was a very successful investment. And within a year or two, we had billions of dollars invested in the former Soviet Union. Now, that was great. And in 1997, we made a very large amount of money. But in 1998, Russia defaulted on its debts. Its currency was heavily devalued. And I remember getting a call from a former colleague of mine at Oriel College, Oxford, who was then the treasurer of Morgan Stanley, asking for a margin call of $40 million. Now, $40 million in 1998 was a lot of money. That wasn't my personal margin call, it was the company's margin call. We only just scraped that. We got the $40 million, but wow, to me, it represented almost 1998. It wasn't a lifetime, but it was a big chunk of work, and it was almost about to go down the tube. So you have to be aware of what might blindside you in either direction. When we all know that when you're riding high, it's the time when it's most likely you're going to have a fall. So I'm very cautious these days about everything that I do.
Yeah, fascinating. There's when we were doing some research on your investment history, and there's such a broad range from real estate and even public markets, commodities, uranium for a time. We actually had some questions from our community around uranium. There's sort of interesting dynamics at play as an emergent byproduct of COVID. There's been sort of supply shocks in a decade ago or more when you were involved. There were some similar there was a similar environment. I'm curious, is this something you're kind of keeping track on, have an opinion on in any way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, basically, when I got involved in uranium, it was a serendipitous moment because I have a friend who's a business partner, and he happened to have a potential uranium deposit in Namibia. We were in my pub in London, where a lot of good ideas happen, and you're both very welcome to come into a pub with me in London if you want. And we each put in $50,000 into this prospect, and within 2 years it was sold for $2.5 billion in cash. Now, that was because uranium, obviously representing nuclear power, was the interregnum between fossil fuels and renewable energy. And the reason that mine has never gone into production is because the price of uranium, which had gone from $20 to $140 a pound, collapsed post-Fukushima. And the Germans also shut down their uranium. But today, and it's interesting you should mention that, I don't have a uranium prospect, but I've invested in Cameco as an example, because I do think that nuclear is going to have its day again. That we just can't move straight from fossil fuels to renewables with certainty and without huge costs, without putting nuclear, which is a clean energy, somewhere in between. And the Chinese are building lots of nuclear power stations. I think that even in the UK, we're building 2 or 3. I guess in the US, you'll be building some as well. So I think it's a good one to invest in at the moment.
Fascinating. Yeah, and so Jim, parlaying a bit. What's so fascinating about you and your background is you really put your money where your mouth is, and you have really strong conviction in certain vectors, certain megatrends. And the two more recently is the one of aging as the fundamental indication, longevity, addressing the 9 hallmarks, et cetera. Switching the paradigm to preventative as opposed to reactive forms of medicine and therapeutics. And then on the food and ag front, right, pivoting into a world where cellular agriculture, synthetic biology, and fermentation are the status quo, and traditional agriculture goes to the wayside. And I'd love to understand, as you were developing that mental model, both in writing and then also manifesting in a company today, Juvenescence, and another one in the food and ag space, agronomics. How did you walk us through that process, as well as give us a sense for why? Like why are those two things so compelling and interesting to you?
Okay, so I've got 2 wonderful biotech partners. We've created a number of biotech companies, and we've invested in biotech for the last 15 years. One is Doogan, who was formerly the head of drug research at Pfizer, and the other is Greg Bailey, who's a well-known funder of biotech companies. And Greg and I were talking, he more about how to live longer with the technologies that were then available, which is basically exercise, reducing harmful inputs into your body, de-stressing, etc. And me more along the lines that, well, the science behind aging is catching up with the aspiration of us all to live at least healthier towards the end of our lives, if not longer. And so, having created a number of biotech companies, a couple of which are listed in the United States, we decided to create Juvenescence. And Juvenescence is an interesting company because we don't know exactly what's going to modify aging, but we know that something's going to modify aging. So we've created about 20 bets, if you want to put it that way, across multiple projects to where we only need one or two to work. And the first goal is to compress the period of what's called morbidity at the end of life. So that's having a dread disease post the age of about 70, which almost everyone does, so it could be osteoarthritis, or it could be cancer or diabetes or whatever it is, and trying to reduce the impact of that, given that people are living longer. Even, in the pandemic period, the life expectancy generally is going up around the world. And then ultimately trying to modify aging so we can slow or reverse it, or even, this is the goal of some people like Eric Verdin, for instance, or Aubrey de Grey, of halting it. And so the way that I create these opportunities is to write a book. And I can tell you that if you write a book, you get access to people who otherwise wouldn't talk to you. So I drove around the US 3.5 years ago, and which is, by the way, was a wonderful experience. It's just such an incredible country, and interviewed all the key opinion leaders that I could find. And they speak to you because they're going to be in a book. And then Juvenescence became the template for our company, which has now raised about $250 million of equity capital, and is in the process will be public sometime this year. And where we have some exciting stuff. We have a consumer-facing division that now has a product on the market, which comes, and I know you're very close to Dr. Eric Verdin. It comes out of his lab in the Buck Institute. It's a ketone ester called Metabolic Switch. It's on sale in the United States. Right. It's really a remarkable product. And then we have an organ regeneration program through our subsidiary called Ligenesis, which is in phase 2 trials in sick patients to regrow livers in situ. So, we're getting there, but we're feeling our way towards it. The longevity industry is at the dial-up phase of the internet equivalent. We're in the very early stage. And as far as agriculture is concerned, I got really interested in cellular agriculture because that comes out of biotech processes, using bioreactors, media, growth factors, etc., to create replicas of meat and fish and materials. And so that's why we got involved in that. And now we're the biggest investors in the world in this area. Now that sounds like a major boast, but I can tell you it's a bit like being an admiral in the Swiss Navy. It's still a very small sector. So, AJ, I think the two are very linked. They're linked to sustainability. They're linked to the need to reduce emissions and the need to improve our human health in so many ways. And so at long last, at the end of, maybe not the end of my career, but the tail end of a long career, I am making, I hope, an impact that's positive for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. And 3.5 years ago, when you came to the US in that exploratory mindset, speaking with people like Aubrey or Eric at the Buck Institute of Aging, what were some big standout takeaways for you when you look back at that experience? What surprised you? What was unknown to you? How did that experience refine your heuristic, perhaps, and sort of manifest what became Juvenescence?
Yeah, so I think it was basically a confluence of, it was a happy coincidence that, Aubrey near Barzilai is another great example. David Sinclair, Eric, have been working on this for literally decades. And because the elixir of youth has been chased by mankind for millennia without success, in some ways it was always regarded as the realm of crackpots and almost religious cult type people. And so, but 20 years ago, the human genome was unveiled. It was unveiled as a map which couldn't be well read. And as time has gone on and computer power has got greater and there's been great scientific collaboration across the internet, the unveiling of that map has become a reading of that map. And we now know, or at least the scientists know, about some of the key pathways, at least, that influence aging. They also know that we are not destined or pre-programmed to die at a specific age. And they know that in at least mammalian and species, that it is possible to manipulate key pathways to keep mammals and ourselves living longer. And what really struck me was the work that was done in some, compounds that are widely available, but for different purposes. Like a very good example is Metformin, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, which is effectively a wonder drug, and which Nir Barzilai has been trying to get funding for his trial for a long time. But as far as I can see, almost every single person in the longevity industry is taking Metformin on a daily basis. And Nir thinks it will add 6 to 8 years to lifespan. And I think Nir is a wonderful, wonderful person. So what really impressed me was the first of all, the collaboration of people in the longevity industry, positive collaboration, which is so great. And, it's not a competitive landscape. If anything works in this field, then it's going to be the biggest industry on the planet, because there aren't many people who don't want to live longer. Even my dad, who's 92, will be signed up for all the drugs if they work, I can assure you. So that was one thing. The second was the fervor and the years and years and years of grinding work that people at Aubrey, Eric, have been doing to advance the cause. And I just felt that, it was an inclusive family and I wanted to be part of it. And I feel that I am now part of it. And I'm very, very grateful to have been included in that, even though I'm not a scientist, but I understand enough to know that we can and will make an impact. And I also make the assertion today that within 30 years, average lifespan at birth will be somewhere between 120 and 130 years. Absolutely possible. And it is a fact, with or without new technology, but with new technology being an even bigger figure, that by 2100, there will be at least 100 million people of 100 years old plus on the planet. And that's up from 500,000 in 1990. So, the progress is incredible.
Yeah. And being on the front lines and making those bets that you made at Juvenescence, I know these things are malleable and elastic and will change, et cetera, but which one of these is it the NAD boosting? Is it senolytics? Is it, something in the computational drug discovery or Wnt pathway? On the front lines today, I know you've created a portfolio approach, but when you're speaking with the research scientists downstream, what today feels like the most promising mechanism that can unlock the most net years of both health span and lifespan?
Yeah, I think there's no polypharma. Sure. It is a polypharma approach. There's no single pill that we're going to be able to take that will keep us alive for another 30 years, at least not now. What I'm very excited about is regenerative medicine. Effectively the image of the classic, you've seen this before, the classic car that's restored to as was state. We are very keen on trying to find ways in which organs that are failing can be regenerated in vivo, and that's a major push for us. And I think that we're getting close to that actually working. And in fact, the FDA has allowed Ligenesis to go into sick patients using lymph nodes as ectopic bioreactors seeded with hepatic cells to basically regrow liver tissue to take over the burden of a failing liver is a very big positive. But that platform can be used to regrow the thymus, where your T cells are produced, regrow the pancreas, ultimately regrow the kidney as well. And the big issue with transplants is that, first of all, there aren't enough organs out there to be transplanted, particularly in livers. Secondly, it's a very expensive and very long operation. In the US, to have a liver transplant is $800,000, and it's about a 15-hour operation. And the third is that you need immunosuppressants for the rest of your life. And just imagine that you'd had a transplant and you're on heavy immunosuppression, and COVID comes along. I mean, you're not even allowed to see anyone, the whole period of COVID, because the slightest infection will take you away. So what we're trying to do is find a way of amalgamating science. And so our company, Ajax, has got a stem cell line called HLA-G, which is a maternal stem cell line that means that the mother doesn't reject the fetus. And we're trying to use that along with Ligenesis technique, which is, by the way, only about $130,000 compared to the $800,000 for a transplant. Plus, it's an outpatient procedure as opposed to an inpatient procedure, and use that to avoid the need for immunosuppression. So the opportunity in regenerative medicine, I think, is number one in my list of what we can do. In terms of what drugs you might want to take, I think that analogs or tweaks of metformin or rapamycin are absolutely something that we're seriously interested in. Senolytics have so far been disappointing, as you well know, and Unity failed in its first trial. It's now engaged in a second phase 3 for age-related macular degeneration. I hope and I pray that it works, because on paper, senolytics should be working, but so far they're not. But as I said earlier, we don't know exactly what's going to work, but we know something's going to work.
Definitely. Yeah, that's super comprehensive. Yeah, I mean, I think there is something for sure in this regenerative medicine realm, the cellular therapeutics realm, and whether it's placental-derived tissue, as an example, in the case of cellularity, or trying to populate kidney or lung scaffolds with mesenchymal stem cells, the work of Martine Rothblatt, et cetera. There is a lot of converging areas that are really showing early signs of promise. It's extremely exciting. So today, Jim, for yourself, because people are going to want to know, you're taking metformin. Are you taking some kind of NAD booster, or what is the constellation of things that you do for yourself, given you have become a champion of longevity research?
Well, they always say, AJ, that the best tailors are the ones that are worst dressed. I'm taking. I've actually started on metformin because at the urging of my colleagues, and I'm not taking NAD boosters. I'm now drinking the ketone ester from Juvenescence, Metabolic Switch, which actually tastes absolutely horrible. But if you remember your mum giving you, medicines and saying if it tastes bad, it's good for you. It's the same. It's the same concept, I guess. And I do feel better. Actually, I've been on it for about 2 weeks, and I feel better for that. So I'm not doing a lot other than exercise. I think, given that we are not at the point yet where this stuff is in wide dispersal, I think exercise is the most important thing, and it can be anything, even walking, but doing, a lot of steps every day. So I do a minimum of 15,000 steps a day, but don't look at me. I think my colleague Greg takes it to extremes, and I'm decked somewhere in the middle, and I'm probably the slouch who prefers to watch Netflix and follow all the advice that I could.
Fair enough. And to parlay there, I mean, there's an enormous amount of capital, particularly in the age of COVID, that has been coming down into pharma or mRNA research or what have you. And longevity really does seem to be like this secret hiding in plain sight, right? I mean, it really is, as you said, it's kind of like the dial-up days, and perhaps we will look back a decade or two and look back maybe on even this conversation and say, wow, this truly was the beginning. the question I have is how do we get more investors interested in longevity? Pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, institutions. What watershed moment do you feel needs to happen in order for that wave to really, really ignite from a capital perspective?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. I mean, I think that the pandemic has done two things. One, it has shown up the need to build up immunoresilience in the elderly cohorts, because as in the United States, as in the UK, as in everywhere else, the average age of people dying of COVID is more or less at the average age of life expectancy. I mean, in the UK, it's actually 1 year ahead of average life expectancy. So older people who have reduced immune systems, building up those immune systems, I think is going to be really important. And any breakthrough there, and again, that's a major focus of us at Juvenescence, is going to both show the capability of extending life and also start garnering the money that is necessary to really propel this thing forward. I completely agree with you, AJ. This is a monumental industry in the making, but as yet, because there isn't anything that is, you can put your hand on and say, this is really working. It's not got the hype around, for instance, cannabis or cryptocurrencies or anything, even though it deserves to have a much, much bigger priority than those things. But we're not that far off the point. There are good companies in this field, some of which you're very familiar with. Peter Diamandis's companies, as an example, the David Sinclair's Life Biosciences, and one or two of us will have something in the next 1 or 2 years that will be mind-shattering and will propel huge amounts into this field. We're not quite at the point. But on the other hand, we're not finding a great deal of resistance to people putting money into the concept.
Sure.
And although money raising is always difficult, as you know, we're doing pretty well on that score. And I'm confident we'll get enough money to progress our programs.
Yeah. And do you feel that sort of recognizing aging as a disease or an indication is sort of a linchpin in this? A lot of aging companies seem to, they'll be pursuing aging, or one of the 9 hallmarks as an example, but they have to masquerade as traditional pharmaceutical companies in pursuant of X, Y, and Z oncology indication. And do you feel? I mean, that is in the zeitgeist a bit. Do you feel like that is of critical importance?
Yeah, my colleague Alex Zhavoronkov, who runs In Silico Medicine, which was our first investment in Juvenescence, which is doing very well, is big on this. Getting aging recognized by the WHO as a disease in itself, and I think he's been making, along with his partners in this mission, some success. And it is important because, let's face it, apart from viral diseases or bacterial infections or some rare childhood diseases, aging is the number one cause of disease. The proliferation of disease as you get older is quite incredible. And so we need to look at aging as the fundamental cascade from which all the diseases of aging come. And I'm totally with you in that. I think that will be a big moment. And we're working on that with partners in the other companies and other organizations in the aging space to try and make that happen. But I have to take my hat off to Alex, because I think he's the main driver of this. But it's a very, very good and well noted point that, as soon as aging is recognized as a disease, then maybe we move forward. Now, I wouldn't say companies are necessarily imposters. What they are doing is they're navigating the FDA and the rules to find a commercial application, because no company can hang around for 30 or 40 years and seeing if, AJ lives to 150 or 100. And well, it's a lot longer than 30 or 50 years, I know, but in my case, let's say, and so they need to find some way of getting a drug or a therapy that's commercialized in the near future. And we're no different to that. We're looking for near-term commercial opportunities, which then measured with biomarkers, and you talk about the hallmarks of aging, but measured with accurate biomarkers that are getting better and better, allow scientists to see if there is actually an aging or anti-aging effect from the therapies that people are taking. But as you know, Metformin is a prescription drug in the United States, but it's not here in Spain. And I can go and buy it in the pharmacy. And so it makes it slightly different for you guys in the US.
Yeah. So Jim, I kind of pivoting into your new book, Moore's Law, which came out last year. It seems like a similar story. You interviewed an enormous number of experts in the space of cellular agriculture and food and ag tech more broadly. And similarly, you're making waves here as an investor and as an entrepreneur. I'd love to learn, again, on the front lines of this industry in particular. What are you seeing? What is promising? What is investable today that can see some rate of return? I mean, we've seen Impossible and Beyond, and even Just, and sort of the plant sort of protein alternatives start to really garner, one, market share, but two, enterprise value. Cellular agriculture seems to be a bit more nascent. Things like fermentation and synthetic biology maybe are a little even more ahead. I'm curious, how, as you map that landscape, what seems that it is within our grasp in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, well, you described it extremely well. I would say that, rather like longevity has come into its own because of a single event, which was the unveiling of the human genome, the rise of alternative proteins has come into its own for 3 or 4 reasons. One is the desire to change the outcome in climate. It is a fact, and you can dispute the percentages, but about 1/5 of noxious gases come from intensive farming. And it's more than any other form of human activity, including transport. So reducing intensive farming is a really good thing for the environment. Secondly, cutting down the rainforests, which everyone is justifiably upset about, is being done to grow soya beans, which then get fed to animals, which are very inefficient converters of plant protein into meat. In the case of cows, it's about 25 to 1. In chickens, it's somewhere between 6 to 9 to 1. That's highly wasteful, and also it adds to further environmental damage. Thirdly, you've got the Indians and the Chinese demanding more and more animal protein, and quite rightly. Why shouldn't they eat, as they get richer, the same stuff as Americans or Europeans do? But in so doing, what's happening is that you're putting unbearable strains on our environmental system and on potential human health. So 80% of antibiotics go into intensively farmed animals. Now, what that does is to create antibiotic resistance in human beings, because I don't eat meat, but the people are eating these meats and they're becoming more and more antibiotic resistant. And, one day it could be, and I know Bill Gates has been banging on about this, but it could be that the antibiotics don't work anymore. And if we got a bacterial pandemic rather than the viral pandemic we have now, where the whole world has been shut down, 3 million people have died, we could be looking at a much, much worse situation. We could be looking at a Black Death. And, people say, oh, no, that's not possible in the modern world. The Black Death was in the Middle Ages. Well, how was our response before vaccinations to this pandemic? It wasn't much better than it was in 1918 or 1920. So we need to reduce the consumption of antibiotics, and 80% of them go into intensively farmed animals. Now, you've also got the overfishing of the seas. I don't know if any of you have watched Seaspiracy, but it's a harrowing tale. This is going to be a massive disruption, and it's happening very quickly. You asked how many companies are investable. We think about 30 in the world, of which we've invested in 14. None of those companies are public, but I would imagine that 1 or 2 of them will go public in the States. You mentioned Eat Just, possibly a SPAC. Memphis Meats in the States, Blue Nalu, which is the leading fish cell ag company, will go public. And of course, you rightly point out, in plant-based meats, you've got Beyond and probably Impossible going public shortly, Live Kindly going public, and Oatly, the Swedish company making oat milk, will go public quite soon. 10 years ago, 0.5% of the US market was alternative milks. Today, it's nudging on between 20 and 25%. The two biggest US milk producers have gone bust, Borden and Dean Foods. That's before you talked rightly about precision fermentation. Before the precision fermentation companies come along, like Perfect Day or Legendary out of Berlin, and they produce absolute replicas of whey casein, making up milk, cheese, yogurt, etc., without any dairy cows being involved. So I'll make these predictions. I'm sorry I'm banging on here, but I'm very passionate about it.
Yeah.
10 years' time, the dairy industry as it currently exists, where you think of cows walking in, being milked, their udders getting distended, their backs breaking after 2 or 3 years, and whereas they would normally live 20 to 25 years, miserable lives, that industry is gone almost all around the world. And we'll be drinking the Perfect Days or the Oatly or whatever.
Yeah.
In terms of meat, 50% of the meat market will be either plant-based, and everyone knows the brands, Meatless Farms, Quorn, Impossible, Beyond, or cell ag. And the reason that I fundamentally prefer cell ag is because there's IP around it. But it's a moat that creates, in my opinion, more value. And so companies that will be able to produce these foods in labs and basically on an industrial scale as the price comes down will become more valuable than the plant-based foods. And they're probably better for human health. There'll be no contaminants, no bacteria, so the shelf life will be longer. In fish, there'll be no mercury, microplastics, which are a disaster for fish at the moment. No antibiotics, no hormones, etc. And the total addressable market for all these things, for dairy, for meat, for fish, is about $5 trillion, which is twice the size of the whole UK economy and about a quarter of the US economy. This is not a trivial market. You know, if Tesla is worth $800 billion on the back of electric vehicles, and these companies are worth peanuts by comparison, they are addressing a fundamentally bigger need. We don't all need to get into a car every day, but we all need to eat. So this is absolutely transformational. And this is alongside longevity and juvenescence, my other main passion. And I don't need to do anything else in my life except focus on these two because, you know, they're both transformational.
Wow, Jim. I mean, we personally, we feel the exact same way. I mean, we have stood up a vehicle at SALT specifically to invest in programmable biology at the intersection of longevity and food and ag. And we are investors in companies like Shiru, which is mentioned in your book. I went to school with Ryan at Perfect Day. We've been friends.
Fantastic.
We've been friends for the last 8 years. Been involved in that company since the beginning. And you know, it really is. It is happening, right? I mean, I think the gating function in cellular ag really is the cost related to the recombinant proteins being fed during the culture expansion process. I'm curious, have you seen again on the front lines some novel approaches to this that'll really kind of move the needle? I mean, Moore's law, I think, is a great analog or heuristic to think about this. But do you feel it'll sort of just happen, or what fundamental breakthrough do you feel needs to happen to unlock this for humanity at large at scale?
Yeah. So there are three. The reason I think that, and I call it griddle parity, that the cell ag products have the potential over time to be lower in price than conventionally farmed meat, in particular, or fish, is because their input ratios at scale, hence Moore's law, are lower. We think about 2.5 to 1 compared to, as I mentioned earlier, 25 to 1 for a cow. But you're absolutely right. The growth factors have to come down in price. Now, the proteins, the recombinant proteins, are currently extremely expensive because they are derived from biotech processes. But we know that in biotech at scale, so for instance, insulin would be a good example, the price comes down dramatically. In the case of insulin, it's about $4 a gram. And we are pretty confident that those same transcriptions will happen in cell ag. Similarly, the bioreactors that are used at the moment are relatively small and they need to be scaled up. And so companies like Sartorius in Germany are working on scaling them up to enormous sizes so that you can produce at 100,000 people's protein from one single factory. And I believe that will happen in the next 2 or 3 years. And then lastly, you've got the media or the nutrients, and we know that they're coming down in price quite dramatically as well. So it's an iterative process. I don't think there's going to be one single massive breakthrough that's going to be absolutely, I don't know, but I don't think it's going to be totally transformative. But I can tell you that if you graph the price of the initial burger unveiled by Mark Post in 2013 in London, who's now the chief scientific officer of Mosa Meat, cost about $300,000 and now is down to about $10. It's following the trajectory of Moore's law, Gordon Moore's original law vis-a-vis semiconductors. So it's only a matter of years before you get down to griddle parity and below. I'm absolutely confident that we're going to get there. I think the bigger roadblock is going to be, number one, the agro-Luddites, particularly in the United States, who are representing cattle farmers and are very anti this stuff, and I can understand why they are, but in a way they should be embracing it because they might actually make some money out of it. And number two, the regulatory process. And then third is, of course, consumer acceptance. Will people accept eating food that's made in a industrial way? And I think that will happen. Yeah. And to give you an illustration of that, I was reading about Louis Pasteur and pasteurized milk. And it's amazing to me that pasteurization was around for a long time before it was used mandatorily in the United States. And people were dying because they were drinking unpasteurized milk, which caused huge amounts of gastro problems in the US. And only when the science was proven to the satisfaction of the then regulators was it made mandatory. But consumers embraced it straight away, even though it meant heating up the milk to 130 degrees Celsius and then cooling it straight away. So it was novel foods are easily embraced if they represent convenience, taste, texture, and price. And those are the 4 key factors that will drive this industry.
Sure. I think that's a really interesting analog. And it leads me to my next question, which is the consequences of this stuff, both in longevity and in food and ag. I mean, do people really want to live forever if they had the option? Do you? Or in the food and ag ecosystem, will people? I mean, my gut is yes, they will accept cellular ag as a mainstay, but there's definitely going to be friction there. I'd love to hear a little bit from you on the kind of downstream, second, third order consequences of these technological inevitabilities, if you would.
Yeah, well, I mean, the consequences of people living healthier for longer are, incredible. In some ways, people do live routinely to 100, 110. It's like adding another 12 hours to your day. Instead of waking up with 24 hours, you wake up with 36 hours. What are you going to do with that time? And that will be a big question for a lot of people. It obviously upends all sorts of financial products, pensions, insurance, government structures, and all that sort of stuff. And there's not enough attention paid to that. So we do a longevity forum every year in London with my collaborators, including Professor Andrew Scott, who wrote The 100-Year Life, to try and educate people about, what are the consequences of this? And by the way, it's an unstoppable train. It's going to happen. And in terms of agriculture, well, luckily, there are 2 parts of agriculture. One is growing crops for human consumption, which is a very profitable business, generally speaking. And then there's also growing crops to put in animals and growing the animals themselves. Both of those hopefully will reduce in intensity. They have to reduce in intensity. But if farmers divert their attention to growing crops for humans, they can make much better margins than they currently do. And a lot of them are just living precariously, trying to grow animals and crops to put into animals. And there is opportunities for farmers to do other stuff with their land, like, for instance, building houses. Since only 1% of the workforce in developed countries works in agriculture, it's not going to be highly disruptive. It's not going to be like the horse and cart being displaced by the motor car. This is, it's going to be all the miners all losing their jobs. This is a much lesser change. And the major part of agriculture is actually the processing, marketing, consumption, retailing of food. And that will stay the same.
Definitely. And Jim, you know, where can people find you, interact with you? Are you active on social media? How do people keep up with your work? I know you've got these recent books coming out, perhaps another one down the pike, but give us a sense there. I'm
on LinkedIn, and anyone can contact me on LinkedIn. I'm not on any of the other things because I think LinkedIn's the only one that's polite and has a special purpose. So I'm on there. Contact me on that, and I'd be very happy to connect anyone to my colleagues if they want to talk directly to any of them. And as far as the books are concerned, the profits go to whatever, and in this case, the Moore's Law, all the profits go to the Good Food Institute, which is the leading advocacy group for trying to reduce intensive farming. I mean, my own motivation, by the way, AJ, on intensive farming is not to make money, but to reduce animal cruelty. And I can see John's wearing his dog thing, and I'm sure you're a big animal lover as well, AJ. I'm sure you are. And we just, can't have any more of this. I mean, chickens in 1950 were 1/3 the size of chickens today. The chickens today live an average of 23 days. The male chicks are shoved into, basically they're butchered when they arrive in the world. And cows, live 28 months before they're slaughtered, and most of them never see the daylight until the day they are slaughtered. We know about fish. I mean, this is it's a cruel and horrible industry, and my motivation is to reduce this as much as possible. Definitely. With that, Jim, I mean, it's been such a pleasure to speak with you. We'd love to see you again on Salt Talks in the future and one of our events in New York or Abu Dhabi, Singapore, as the world opens up. But with that, I mean, John. I think, Jim, we would obviously love to have you in New York in September, but Ibiza, where you're stationed right now, is definitely not a bad move. So I don't blame you if you decided just to kick your feet up on the beach and continue the great work you're doing, but we would love to see you. I would love to come. We're longing to travel, actually, and it would be super to be included in one of your events. I really appreciate it. And look, it's been an absolute pleasure, AJ and John. Thank you for having me. Yep. And thank you for joining us. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to today's Salt Talk with Jim Mellon of Juvenescence. Just a reminder, if you missed any part of this talk or any of our previous Salt Talks, you can access them on our website at salt.org/talks and on our YouTube channel, which is called Salt Tube. We're more active on social media than Jim. We're on Twitter at Salt Conference. That's not to say we don't get some hate messages every once in a while. They'll probably be talking about how I'm not dressed properly or wasted too much time in the introduction before we got to the good stuff with AJ and Jim. Get all kinds of hateful messages on social media, but we try to keep our self-esteem in order and block it out. But also spread the word about these Salt Talks. We think these issues related to longevity, as we talked about, the animal cruelty issue is obviously very important, and also just helping people live healthier, longer lives, we think is a very noble mission and a great cause. So on behalf of AJ and the entire Salt team, this is John Darcy signing off from Salt Talks for today. We hope to see you back here again soon.